What a difference a week can make, because yes, that's right, Disney Lorcana has introduced their first bans with Hiram Flaversham Toymaker and the Fortisphere both finding themselves on the ban list. As you'd expect, this has had a seismic impact on the Disney Lorcana metagame. And actually, Matheus and I are in the process of getting our house ready for sale, so I'm going to take a break from decorating and cleaning in order to take a look at the metagame for this week. So, should we do it? First things first, we are going to take a look at the meta representation. Again, this is data taken from Inkdecks for the last 7 days, and this is the number of different archetypes that we've seen in the metagame. And comparing this to last week, it's actually insane. Remember, last week, almost 60% of decks were some combination of Sapphire, and it could not be more different this week. Obviously, the changes with those bans have really had an impact. We've seen so much more variety of decks. Very, very awesome to see. So one of the big things we're not seeing here is actually Sapphire Steel. So Sapphire Steel were the most represented deck for the last couple of weeks, and actually this week we have not even seen them in the top 10. So that is absolutely insane. It clearly shows how much of an impact Hiram and the Fortisphere were having on kind of the existence of that deck. It might just be a bit of an overreaction and an overcorrection. We might see Blue Steel or Sapphire Steel coming back into the metagame, but right now it's not looking good for this deck that finally was having its chance to shine. The deck with the most representation over the last 7 days was Amethyst Steel, putting up some really good tournament results over the weekend, which we're going to be taking a look at. Amber Steel, of course, and especially Amber Steel Songs making its comeback. I think as soon as there's any weakness in Sapphire, Amber Steel is ready to get in there and really show up in full force. After that, of course, Ruby Amethyst, another deck that's like that. As soon as the Sapphire decks start to struggle, then Ruby Amethyst is going to come back in the fold. And we're also seeing representation of other niche decks. We're seeing some Amber Ruby Mufasa showing up. We're seeing some Amethyst Emerald Bounce rather than the discard archetype, and so much variety in those other decks as well. So very excited to take a deeper look into the data. We're going to be looking at the top 8 for 4 different tournaments this weekend. The biggest of those was the Ostlore Meisterschaft in Europe. This was a 131 player tournament in Germany. Some very, very good players there, including Moyen, including DKP, and Speci was commentating. So very, very competitive tournament there. And then over on this side of the Atlantic, we have 3 tournaments that we are looking at in the United States. So that's the Encounter Enchanted Elsa 2K, which had 57 players, and there were a bunch of Forbidden Mountain people there. There were the House of Cards Winston Lorcana 2K with 55 players, and Double Lux Games with 41 players. So let us start off by looking at the Ostlore Meisterschaft top 8. As you can see, Ruby Sapphire is still very much alive, even with the changes to those cards with the ban of Hiram. But what we are going to see and what we are going to notice is that it's more toward the DKP list, which is relying more on the Maui Half Shark and the Manners. So unsurprisingly, DKP doing well here. One of the best players in the game, and he always shows up. And actually, this is the second time for him in a row winning the Ostlore tournament, so doing really well. After that, we do have Ruby Amethyst taking both the 2nd and 3rd spot, doing really well. And then 3 Emerald Steels in the top 8 there. Over at the Encounter, which was 57 players, actually the top 3 decks were all Amethyst Steels, so doing really, really well in this tournament. After that, the top 8 was really, really diverse. So other than the 3 Amethyst Steel decks, we got 1 each of every other deck. That was Ruby Sapphire, Amethyst Emerald, Amber Emerald, Emerald Steel, and also Ruby Amethyst there. So very, very diverse top 8. Another very diverse top 8 at the House of Cards event. 2 Ruby Sapphire, 2 Amethyst Steel, 1 Ruby Amethyst who ended up taking the event, and then also an Amethyst Emerald, an Amber Steel, and an Amber Amethyst. Really cool to see that. And then at the top 8 for the Double Lux Games, we had 3 Amber Steel. That was split between Steel Song and Amber Steel Aggro, kind of the diggy hole version. We saw 2 Amethyst Amber, which is really, really fun to see. One of those making top 3. And then 1 each of Amethyst Ruby, Amethyst Steel, and Amethyst Sapphire. So Amethyst really doing quite well at the moment. And so with that, let's take a look at the best decks and the most interesting decks from those tournaments. So we're going to start off with this first place list from Nunez at the Encounter, with Amethyst Steel here. You might recognize the name Nunez. He took second place, I believe it was, at the Toronto DLC. So very, very good player. Also a member of the Forbidden Mountain. With this Amethyst Steel list, which is looking very, very similar to what we've seen in the past. This is becoming quite a well-oiled machine. The core cards of this deck list are pretty much nailed down, but we do have some kind of different ratios in here, and we're going to look at another list that tweak those ratios a little bit. But we do see the 12 1-drop, so you can get a really, really aggressive start against your opponent. We've got Calhoun in there as a bit of kind of defensive ability, should we say. She's there to kind of make your opponent think twice about turning sideways. After that, all of the things we kind of expect from this list and all the things we have been seeing. So Giant Cobra, of course, great way to close the game. 3 copies of the White Rose as well to get some of that lore that your opponent kind of almost can't prevent, and Merlin Goat in here as well. And then 2 copies of the library. The library, of course, a great way in this deck to help you draw cards. So yep, brilliant list. Great job to Nunez there for taking first place. And then actually his opponent in that final, this is Sam Willman's list, looking very, very, very similar indeed. In fact, the difference in this list is the 4 copies of Helga Sinclair. So Helga is a really, really fascinating card in this list. The 4 willpower means she does dodge a lot of that early steel removal, so she will survive. And then the Challenger 3 can be very relevant. There are a lot of targets that do have 3 willpower, but importantly, she gains evasive on your turn, which means she is the perfect counterplay to Diablo if you're expecting to see a lot of Diablo. So yeah, very cool list here. Obviously did very, very well at that event as well. So great job to Sam. I watched the final. It was really some of the most fun gameplay to watch. Very back and forth, very, very swingy. Players kind of building up boards and reacting, and yeah, a really good demonstration of kind of the fundamentals of Lorcana, especially with these mid-range decks. So definitely try and check out that match if you can, if you're interested in seeing some Amethyst Steel mirror matches. And then next we're going to look at Amber Steel, and we're going to start off with this first place list from Ben Fishman, who took the first place at the Double Lux Games event. And this is Amber Steel songs. Anyone who's watched the channel will know I'm a huge Amber Steel songs fan. It's probably my favorite deck, so it's always amazing for me to see this deck doing well, and including a lot of what we would expect from these lists at this point. So Ben actually chose, rather than going 4 on either the Troubadour or Ursula, he's kind of splitting the difference a little bit. 1 Troubadour and 3 Ursulas, obviously favoring the Rapunzel heals there. The Troubadour does have a little bit more staying power, but it means you don't get as much healing off Rapunzel. So in this case, he's really hoping more for that side of things, which makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of debate in Steel Song circles about whether you should play the Troubadour or Ursula. I personally prefer the Troubadour, but yeah, I can definitely see the advantage of Ursula as well. After that, 4 copies of Miss Bianca. This card is really, really great. I actually played with it for the first time in person at League last week, and such a powerful card. So great into matchups like Discard, because it's a lot harder for them to remove Miss Bianca from the board, which often means you'll be able to set up her to sing Whole New World on the following turn. After that, 1 copy of Prince Naveen, always great in these lists. He's such a good way to break the kind of going second disadvantage, especially against Emerald Steel as well. 1 copy of Cinderella Stout-Hearted, a fantastic card in this list. Really good against your opponent if they're not turning their cards sideways, so something like Prince John. With Ward, your opponent often won quests with them, so Cinderella could be the difference maker then. And 2 copies of World's Greatest Criminal Mind helps you deal with things like Maui Shark, Big Tamato, which we're seeing a lot less of this week than we were the week before, but still Maui Shark, definitely a great target for that, as well as something like Pluto, or even Miss Bianca's in the mirror match. Next up, a slightly different looking Amber Steel list. This is more of an aggro version from Jonathan Miller, who took top 2 at that same event, so they played each other in the finals. Of course, Steel Song is kind of favored into this matchup, but a lot of really interesting things in this list to look at. We have a lot of the things we'd expect to see. The Cinderellas, the Daisy Ducks, the Happy as well is great with the synergy with the mines, but also as a way to take care of Diablo. But then there are some really interesting things in here. Penny, people were trying her out in more traditional Amber Steel lists, but she is now kind of finding more of a home in these aggro variants. After that, another player, including 2 copies of Helga Sinclair, the threat of Diablo in this metagame is real, and players are coming teched out to deal with him. Another thing that I really like in this list is the Prince. So it's a card I haven't seen that much, but his resist one is incredibly relevant, especially if you're expecting to see a lot of steel decks. He can help protect your characters, and if your opponent does challenge into him and they don't finish him off, then you can always play Penny to heal him up as well. So it can make him very, very sticky to the board. And then 2 copies of Smash. Definitely an interesting card there. I know a lot of decks tend to run something like a Baboom, mainly as a way to deal with Diablos. So this player potentially expecting some more 3 willpower characters. So a very interesting addition there. And for those of you who prefer the more aggro version of this list, this could be a good place to start when you're doing some deck building. And next, a deck that never seems to die. This is Ruby Amethyst. This is Jackson Tran, who took the first place at the House of Cards event. So great job to him. And this does seem to be the evolution of Ruby Amethyst as we would expect going forward. Once more, we're seeing a lot of counterplay to Diablo and Emerald Steel discard in this list. We've got Pegasus, a 3/1 that gains evasive, so he can be shot down by steel removal, but he is a threat there that will prevent your opponent's Diablo turning sideways if they can't remove him. We've also got Peter Pan, Shadow Finder, 2/3 questing for 1, but he's a rush evasive, and he also gives rush to your evasive characters, which has some really, really nice synergy with Genie. You can rush your Genie in to deal with Diablo, but he also has synergy with Maui Half Shark. So we are seeing quite a few actions in this list. We're seeing 1 copy of Dragonfire, great to deal with opposing Maui Half Sharks. We're seeing Finders Keepers, which is actually a very interesting one. Primarily, I would expect as a way to dodge the Ursula Deceiver, because it's something that she can't remove from your hand. And then 2 copies of Iago as well. One of the illusions maybe seeing a little bit more play this set than the others, and of course the synergy with Peter Pan Shadow Finder, being able to play Peter Pan and then rushing out Iago on the next turn could be incredibly powerful. So very, very fascinating list. And then another Ruby Amethyst list that did really well. This was the second place list from Ostlore, Meisterschaft MC Bradfirst. Again, a fantastic looking list here. I watched the final of his game against DQP. Like masterclass of how to play this list, and it's including a lot of the pieces we saw in that previous list. We've got 4 copies of the Peter Pan Shadow Finder, we've got 1 copy of Finders Keepers, both there really to help in those Emerald Steel matchups. But then some really interesting things in here. We've got 3 copies of Moana. She's another evasive, and when she challenges a character, she can give chosen character +4 strength. Very helpful at helping you kind of control the board, dealing with some big willpower characters. And as we saw in the final against DKP, she can be very helpful at helping you take down locations as well. So yeah, it's nice to see this card kind of finding a place. And then we also have 3 copies of Sisu Empowered Sibling. Again, very, very good in the Emerald Steel matchup, because it'll help you get around the ward from Prince John, help you deal with Diablos. So very good list. Great job to MC Broadfirst for doing well. And it was actually interesting. He and his brother were both top 4. They almost met in the finals, but DKP was there to make that not happen. But yeah, check out the games. Super fun to watch. And then speaking of DKP, this is his winning list from that same tournament. He did take first place there. And Ruby Sapphire is definitely still here, definitely still pulling up performances even without Hiram in the mix. So I think many people did predict that without Hiram, the kind of direction that Ruby Sapphire would take is something more like this list. This was the list that DKP took to first place at the Australian DLC, relying a lot on Maui Shark to generate lore as well as McDuck mana. You'll often see, if you watch him play, it's kind of set up the mana and then protect the mana at all costs, and that's often how games can be won. But you'll see this list has evolved quite a lot. We do still see the 4 copies of Popsicle on this list, and that's there mainly, it seems, as a way to dig. It just helps you get 1 card deeper into your deck. But the fascinating thing is DKP and other players running Popsicle still in this list have been using its secondary function to heal a lot more. Now that you can't banish it with Hiram, actually people are making use of the Popsicle. So a very nice unintended result there of actually making the item kind of do what the designers intended. So a lot more Popsicle usages. Of course, you can bring it back with Tamator afterwards. Other things to call out in this list. So there's only 1 copy of Goofy now. It is good as a way of generating lore to help you deal with some early aggression as well. But DKP opting to kind of focus elsewhere on the list. We also see 4 copies of Sisu Empowered Sibling in here. And again, this very much looking like a way to help deal with that early aggression and also help you deal with Emerald Steel. 4 copies of Develop Your Brain, just giving you a little bit more consistency on turn 1, helping you dig and try and find the ramp for turn 2, which is very, very critical for this list. One very interesting inclusion in this list is All Is Found. This is a song, 5-cost song, that will let you put 2 cards from your discard into your Inkwell. DKP, I watched a bunch of his games. This was ink every single game, and he did say that this was tech included in the list to help in the Emerald Steel discard matchup, which he said he never faced. So it almost always ended up as ink. But fascinating card, and the cost of the Enchanted no doubt is skyrocketing right now. So if you want to get your hands on this card, get it sooner rather than later, because it's probably going to keep going up for the next few weeks. And then another Ruby Sapphire list. This is a lot more like the Sisu and Ice list. So this player took top 8 at the encounter, Stefan, and actually a lot of people were kind of writing off this deck now. Without something like Hiram, it kind of reduces your ability to cycle through your deck, to be able to ink to set off the Sapphire Coil as much as you would want. But actually this player demonstrating that it is still possible to do well with this kind of older archetype of the list. Some things to point out here. So we do have the Queen Diviner turn 3. If you have so many items in your list, a lot of kind of higher cost items like the Great Stone Dragon, the Potion of Might, the Maurice's Workshop, then being able to get that out for free with the Queen is really, really impactful. 2 copies of Raya. She will let you ready the Queen, so then you can use the Queen's ability once more. So that can be very, very powerful. And if you've been able to reach that critical mass of items, you'll be able to play Scrooge McDuck for free and hopefully dig a little deeper to find the items you need. So very, very fascinating kind of take on the Ruby Sapphire list. And it's kind of interesting to see kind of it doing away with things like How Far I'll Go, instead hoping for the kind of Sail the Azurite Sea on 2, otherwise the Fishbone Quill on 3, in terms of how to kind of accelerate the ink. So yeah, fascinating list, and watch out for how Ruby Sapphire kind of develops over the weeks to come. And before we look at our next list, I just want to give a huge shout out to the sponsors of today's video, HeavyPlay. HeavyPlay have their Equip Mag system, which lets you connect your deck box to your dice box and your player mat, all with the power of magnets. It makes it super easy to switch tables when playing tournaments. They also have the curved sleeves with curved corners. It makes it super easy to shuffle your deck, and it'll make sure that you never have a card upside down ever again. If you want to get your hands on any HeavyPlay products for your next tournament, you can visit them at heavyplay.com and use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. So thanks again to HeavyPlay, and then let's look at the next list. So this is the top 4 list from Andy1066 at the Ostlore Meisterschaft, and this is Emerald Steel. After the announcement of the ban on Hiram, a lot of people felt like Emerald Steel discard was going to be running absolutely wild, but this deck list did make it to the top 4, and including a lot of what we would expect from this kind of archetype going forward. Of course, a lot of the game plan is going to be around getting your Diablo down on turn 1, shifting him on turn 2, putting him in the cover if you can, and then protecting him from there. It just can be so devastating for your opponent to deal with. One of the fascinating things about this particular list is we don't see any Ursula Deceiver of all. She's kind of like a staple in a lot of these lists. We also don't see any copies of Hypnotize in this list. So this player looking more to control the board and not necessarily kind of control their opponent's hand. And that might make sense because we do see cards in here like Clarabelle. 3 copies of the legendary Clarabelle can be such a great way to generate card advantage in these matchups. So yeah, maybe kind of opting for that kind of line instead. And then we also see 1 copy of Aerial Sonic Warrior, not a card you often see in these lists, but with so many songs available, she can be such a great way to control your opponent's board, especially if you're expecting maybe more steel matchups, less ruby matchups. Even in this space, with this list that does feel like it should be quite locked down at this point, there is still innovation, and it is awesome to see. Next up, we have one of my favorite decks coming out of this set. This is an Amber Emerald Chernodog list that took top 8 at the encounter from Edge Knight, and including a lot of things that we've come to expect with this list. So we have a lot of early aggression. We have 20 1-drops, and most of which are going to be questing for 2. Of course, being able to play a kind of critical mass of 1-drops will let you get your tramp out sooner. But we are also seeing some other new inclusions in this list. Of course, it's a list that's quite new, so players are refining it. But we see 2 copies of Julieta Madrigal, such a good way to help you draw cards. It's kind of like a backup Rapunzel, a cheaper Rapunzel. We do also see 3 copies of Donald Duck with so many low-cost characters. Being able to protect them on a turn and quest out with them for a little bit longer can be incredibly impactful on the game. And we see 2 copies of Dale. Dale is a fascinating card that will let you put the top 3 cards of your deck into your discard, gives a character -3 strength, but of course also powers up your Chernobog. And then after that, we do have Cricky, a great quester, but also can help you be a little bit more defensive if needed. And Big Pegasus, you've got the baby in there. Big Pegasus giving all of your characters evasive can be super crippling for a lot of decks to deal with. So it's great to see the continued improvement on this deck, and I'll be curious to see how it does now that the meta game has kind of shifted more towards steel. And another more aggressive deck doing really well this weekend. This took top 8. This is Zachary Power's list at Double Luck Games. Very much the hyper aggro version of Amber Amethyst that we've seen in the previous set. Not that many new cards from what we've seen in previous sets. We do see 2 copies of Honey Marin, a cheap way to generate some lore for yourself, and 3 copies of Show Me More, a card that lets both players draw 3 cards. Often you're going so fast you don't really care that your opponent is drawing cards, but you also have things in here like Befuddle, really to disrupt your opponent's game plan. So fascinating list. I think it's always a good sign in the metagame when hyper aggro is doing well. It's, for me, kind of an indicator of diversity. So very happy to see hyper aggro doing well. And another Amber Amethyst list here. Not a hyper aggro, a little bit more range. Another top 8 list, this time from Lucas Serrano at the House of Cards 2K. Looking a lot different from the list we just looked at. So we do still see some of that early aggression in the form of Daisy Duck, but we're kind of more going for the mid-game strategy. So we do see things like the Peter Pan Shadow Finder there to help you deal with the opponent Diablos. Once more, we're seeing 3 copies of Iago in this list. The synergy there with Peter Pan Shadow Finder to give him evasive, super powerful there. Genie too, a great way to draw cards, but can also be used defensively with Peter Pan. We also see 3 copies of Madam Mim, a tiny adversary who's going to give all of your characters Challenger +1. So giving you that little bit of extra strength you need to deal with in some cases to take down your opponent's side of the board. So once more, very happy to see a list like this doing really well. And for anyone who doesn't know Luca, he is kind of a Lorcana wunderkind. He's a super young player who is always putting up really, really great results. So great job to him taking top 8 at this event. Another deck list that took top 8. This time it is going to be Amethyst Sapphire. This is Richie Young who took top 8 at Double Lux Games. And I just wanted to highlight this one again. I know a lot of people enjoy Amethyst Sapphire, and this is a very good looking list here. One thing, of course, to point out here is that the inclusion of Belle, Apprentice, Inventor. And I think one of the fascinating things about how this list is kind of played, or should I say one of the downsides often of Amethyst Sapphire, was that you could struggle to deal with wide boards. You have a lot of kind of more costly characters, and it takes a little while to get into them. But Belle kind of helps shore up some of those matchups. So you can establish the popsicles early on, help you kind of draw deeper into your deck. And then when your opponent starts going wide, you can start popping those popsicles to play your Bells. I played against someone running a very similar list, and it's definitely a great counterplay to those decks who are just trying to go as wide as they can. We do also see 3 copies of Belle Accomplished Mystic in this deck list as well. So again, something you can shift on top of Belle. If Belle has damage, you can move that damage as well when you shift her. One other thing to call out is 4 copies of Finders Keepers. This player expecting, no doubt, the Emerald Steel match. So again, a great way to help deal with that. And in a deck list like this, where you're kind of inking as aggressively as you are, you often have the ink spare to be able to do something like this, help you get more characters onto the board. So great to see this list doing well. Love to see that diversity. And then the final list to look at today. So this was a top 16 list, but it was at the Ostlore Meisterschaft. Again, a very, very competitive event. So it's a great job to Jacob Nussler for doing well with this deck list. And it is Amber, Ruby, Mufasa. It wasn't looking good this set for this deck, but now that Hiram has been banned, this deck has the opportunity to kind of come back and maybe pose a threat to the metagame. And yeah, a fascinating list. I always love the way that these Ruby, Amber, Mufasa lists are built, because there are so many 1-ofs and 2-ofs in these lists, just because you can kind of go a little bit more wacky because of Mufasa's ability. So we do see that here. We're seeing the card Soldiers, we're seeing the Queen of Hearts, both cards new this set. But the interesting thing about the card Soldiers is that when you have a damaged character in play, he becomes a 3/2, and you will be having a lot of damaged characters in this deck. Your main draw is through things like Mulan and Mother Gothel, and then using the Rapunzel to heal them up. So it means often that something like the Card Soldier is going to be buffed up quite early. After that, we do see the things you kind of expect. Some of those early ways to deal with aggression. We do see 3 copies of Prince Eric in there, a great way to deal with your opponent's big characters, because this is a deck that doesn't want to be running that many removal actions. But we do see 2 copies of Brawl there, no doubt, to deal with Diablo if you're not able to deal with him with things like Vanellope von Schweetz or things like your Madame Medusas. So very, very awesome list, and just super good to see so much variety in the metagame. So that is us for today. Such a huge change from last week in terms of the metagame. So much variety. It is so good to see. But let us know down below, what do you think about the bans? Do you agree with them? Are you happy to see the back of Hiram Flaversham? And if you enjoyed this video, please do be sure to give us a like and subscribe, because we'll be doing one of these every week along with our regularly scheduled content. Shout out again to the sponsors of this video, Heavy Play. If you want to grab any Heavy Play products, be sure to visit them at heavyplay.com and use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. A huge shout out as well to our YouTube members. Thank you so much for all of the support for the channel. If you are interested in becoming a YouTube member, you can hit the join button. It's just down there to find out all of the details, including the perks available, such as early access to our videos. So check that out if you're interested. And for another week, this has been a Meta Report, and until the next time, happy questing.